in it, the impact that it had on him was amazing. The hardships that we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. And so we know that it occurred in the province of Asia. He tells us that. And apparently that's enough information for the Corinthians, whether they know about it or not. And in this particular section, from verse 8 down through verse 11, he's going to use the term for death twice. He's going to use the term for deliverance 3 times. He's going to use many, and in our behalf, twice as well. And so there's just, it's a package deal. So when he names Asia, that sends us kind of scuttling back to Acts the 19th chapter and the uproar that was caused by Demetrius and the silversmiths and the riot that took place in Ephesus. And at least we're looking there for some sort of observable clue. And because it's in Asia, that then causes us to even focus more on Ephesus. But I'm afraid we're not going to find it here. I don't think it's recorded. Whatever this was, I don't think it's recorded for us. When we get over to 2 Corinthians, is it the 11th chapter, when he goes through all of his trials, how many of those are not in Acts? Several. I mean, yes, he was stoned. We know about the stoning, but we don't know about all the beatings. The shipwrecks, we know about those. We know about one, but it's later. And yet he talks about being shipwrecked. And the one that we read about in Acts 27 and 28 hasn't happened yet when he writes 2 Corinthians. So, and you just have to remember, Luke is not giving us Paul's itinerary in the book of Luke. He's trying to show, and I think we talked about this when we were studying Acts, he's trying to present an argument for Paul in court, in the Roman court, that he's not a danger to the Roman government. He's not a rebel or trying to lead a rebellion. So I think that whatever Paul's talking about is an event like the ones that aren't covered in the book of Acts. But the seriousness of whatever this is that happened here can't be missed from what Paul says. And so we're just going to have to be satisfied, at least I will, unless I'm not going to disassociate you from you wanting to believe that it's in Acts 19. That's perfectly okay. But this is enough for me. Whatever he says here, that it was a true occurrence, and I'm satisfied with that, and I don't have to wonder about when it was or what happened in specifics.
We just have to ask him when we see him.
Yeah, and I think I've said this before, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but listen, when I get in heaven, the last thing I'm going to be wondering is, Paul, what happened to you there? 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Enlighten me. That's going to be so out of the picture for me. So he says we're under pressure. And you probably could guess, what the root word of pressure is. Want to take a shot at it? What? No, that would be breath. Yeah. What do you have on your wall next to your thermometer that shows the air? A barometer, and it's bareo, B-A-R-E-O. And it just means pressure. And in this particular case, it has the idea of overweighted, of being burdened excessively, weighted down exceedingly beyond ability. It's like a ship it's got too much cargo, and it's listing, and it's ready to sink because they've put too much on board. And Paul is basically saying that he, and again, perhaps Timothy, I'm not sure if he's a part of that, he does say we, But he's saying that he crumbled under this weight. In fact, he's going to continue to say here, we were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure. Now, if I were to ask you, how much do you think Paul could endure, what would you say?
Quite a bit.
Oh, man. When he can endure a lot. But Paul's saying, not this time. Not on this occasion. And so that should add to our understanding of the dire situation he is in. And again, that's part of the reason I don't think that Ephesus and the riot there is because what was he willing to do? He's willing to go in there. In this case, he wouldn't be. He would be saying, I can't. I'm not able. This is too much for me. And then he goes on to say, so much that we despaired even of life. And the despaired here is exaporeo, E-X-A-P-O-R-E-O. And it means to be utterly at a loss. It means to be without any resource. To put it another way, Paul said he lost hope. He gave up hope that he was going to get through this. He had no hope that his life was going to continue. It's like we would say, his back is against the wall. He has nowhere to go, no way out. He had no resources of his own. And in fact, he's going to say, indeed, our hearts felt the sentence of death. But this happened so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Now, let me. I keep wanting to get ahead of myself here, and I don't want to do that. And so my translation has in verse 9, begins in verse 9 with indeed. Do you have something different in your text?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Or yea? I think the King James Version, I don't know if we have any people with King James here tonight. Yes, does it have but?
Yes.
There you go. Indeed is better than but. Yea is better than both. Because he's saying, yes, in talking about the despair, in talking about the pressure, in talking about his inability to endure, he's saying, in addition to that, yes, in fact, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. And again, if people are searching around for this, is not speaking of a court trial verdict. This verdict didn't come down from a judge and have the sentence of death. Where did this verdict come? Where was it seen? It's in the text.
New King James says in ourselves.
Yeah, in ourselves, in his heart. This is a sentence that he's feeling from within.
That's what mine says. We have the sentence of death within ourselves that we could not trust in ourselves.
Right. And so Paul's saying he and maybe Timothy, they're face to face with death. And that's what Paul's wanting them to know. How he was feeling, how he was totally hopeless. And why did that happen? Why did that happen to Paul? Why is Paul telling them this? Why is he sharing this event with them?
Well, Henry Alford suggested it was a life-threatening illness. The sentence was within himself, not external.
Okay.
But it's ourselves, not just Paul.
Right. And if it's Timothy there too, then he's feeling it as well. And I don't think this has anything, again, this is just me though, I don't think this has anything to do with this thorn in the flesh that he's going to talk about later. I think that there is there's some oppression, some external force here that is coming on Paul to the point, and the pressure and the despair that welling up within him is this notion we're going to die. And listen, he's not. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just curious with what Greg just said too, because my Bible has a note that says throughout this letter, Paul uses the editorial plural, we, us, our, ourselves, except where context plainly indicates otherwise. These plurals should be understood as referring to Paul alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's actually the case.
Well, I mean, we're going to see, I think down in verse 15 is the first time he's going to say I, or verse 13. He doesn't use I for a long time. But in this immediate context, if I wanted to do that, who's in this immediate context? Well, there's Paul and Timothy, our brother. And so the we there can include him in this. I don't know if it is or not.
If the thing I mentioned from Acts, if that is not something that Paul felt particularly threatened by, then there's some power much more significant than people threatening his life because they're taking away his livelihood. Is the devil stepped in here?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to me to be that either. I don't think it was the mob, but I think there was something else. And I think that they had him, and maybe both of them, and they're going to kill him. There's some life-threatening situation that he's in that he doesn't see any way out of. And the reason he's sharing this, I don't think it's to excite their sympathies. Well, wow, Paul, you went through a lot. I take back everything I ever said about you or thought about you or anything like that. He's showing this because this was part of the purpose of God. And he's going to go on to say that, depending on, again, how you interpret this. But this happened, so he's going to tell us why it happened. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God.
But that's the strange thing to me, where it says the sentence of death within ourselves.
Right.
That we should not trust in ourselves. I'm just trying to figure out how does a mob that captures them create a sentence of death within ourselves? We have a sentence of death, but
Right.
why would I say within ourselves?
Because he finds himself in a situation that he sees, from his own perspective, he sees no way of getting out of life.
I understand that.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is what the term within ourselves just strikes me as odd. If I can see him having this threat, this immediate threat, but to say within ourselves, it's almost as if something has attacked his soul.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just within him. Have you ever been in a life-threatening situation? I mean, I have. I was hunting on Eastern Washington with Mark and Sonny, chukar hunting, and I shot a bird. The hillside was like this, and I shot a chukar, and it landed on the other side. And in between, if you've been over in Eastern Washington, you ever see these hillsides that are just rock, just chunks of rock? And I needed to get over there, where that bird was. And I started walking over there. And guess what started happening to the rock? It starts rolling. And I start running, because I got to get ahead of the rock. I knew I was going to die. For just a brief moment there, I'm dead. I'm toast. The sentence of death welled up inside me. Okay? And I think that's what he's feeling here. Did I ever tell you about that, Robin? Good. So,
Do you think he's only just talking about himself and not about the church at all?
no, this is him. This happened in Asia. This happened while he was over there, and whatever it was. And he said he's saying it happened to us so that we'd rely on God. So either he or he and Timothy had been stripped down to their core that the only way out was going to be God. He came to that realization. The only way we're getting out of this is if God's with us. And it's not just God, it's God who what? Who raises the dead.
Who delivered us and does deliver.
Okay? So the God who raises the dead I can come up with two ideas. One was that Paul was brought to the point by God, because God's doing this to him. That's the way he's pacing. This was brought upon us so that we'd rely on God. Well, who allowed that to happen? God did. So that he would only rely on him. And how powerful is this God when you think about this, the God that he was caused to rely on, what's the greatest thing that he could do for you? Or will do for you? He'll raise you from the dead. Okay? And so it could be that their only hope out of this predicament is they are going to die, but God's going to raise them from the dead. It's not going to be the end of their story that they lose their life. And by delaying his deliverance, that they would come to a place to finally trust him totally, and he would save them. And that in this, God rebuilt them. And I took you down to the very, very pinnacle or precipice of death, and I brought you back up.
Do you think this is saying that God stopped everything before they died
I don't know.
or raised them?
That's one possibility. The other possibility is that death was coming and their only hope was going to be the resurrection. So God's taking them to the very point and then going to rescue them, or God's going to allow them to die and rescue them. And I don't know what he meant by the God who raises the dead. They are not mutually exclusive. It's a powerful God regardless of that.
Kind of brings parallels to Abraham and Isaac.
Yes? Yeah. So,
This happened after the Lystra Derby thing where,
yes.
I mean,
Yeah, because that was in Galatia, and this is in Ephesus.
But what I'm saying is, he pretty well, I mean, he could very well have been raised from the dead then. And
Right.
Because he was left, they thought he
They left him for dead, didn't they? Yeah. So, this is on the second missionary journey, and he's been in Ephesus now, and something's happened here, and they don't know about it. He's already been to Corinth once, and founded the church and left, and now he's come back, and this is happening in the third journey. And with hindsight, I can see that the first one makes the most sense, that he took him to the brink of death and brought him back, and the power of God, the power of a God who does resurrections, in essence, as Anna just said there, brought them back from the dead. I don't know, and I don't need to know myself the exact circumstances. They were real enough, and they're so graphically expressed here from Paul's description that I can just accept this, whatever it was, and I don't have to know. And so when you ask me, well, what do you think about that? I don't know. I don't know when it happened. But I know God rebuilt them. He brought them back, and he brought Paul back. And listen, as far as I know, you'll never see Paul waver again like this. Remember last week I told you that 2 Corinthians, when I told you in the introduction, we're going to see Paul just laid open. You're going to see Paul like you've never seen him before. We've always have him up there as the knight, and you know, you can't defeat him, and you can't dissuade him, and you can't discourage him. And in fact, let me take you to a couple passages here, because this is what we think of when we think of Paul and his faith and his confidence. Somebody go to Acts 21, verses 12 and 13. And somebody else read Philippians chapter 1, 20 through 24. Acts 21, 12 and 13. Who has it? Okay, Greg.
Then Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." And when he would not be persuaded, we ceased saying, "The will of the Lord be done."
Okay. So they're telling him, don't go to Jerusalem. You're going to die there. He said, why are you going weeping and breaking my heart? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to die there. And then Philippians 1, 20 through 24. Okay, John.
All in accordance with my most confident hope and trust that I shall never have to admit defeat, but with complete fearlessness I shall go on, so that now, as always, Christ will be glorified in my body, whether by my life or my death. Life to me, of course, is Christ, but then death would be a positive gain. On the other hand again, if to be alive in the body gives me an opportunity for fruitful work, I do not know which I should choose. I am caught in this dilemma. I want to be gone and to be with Christ, and this is by far the stronger desire. And yet, for your sake, to stay alive in this body is more urgent need.
Okay. Now, historically, with regards to this event Paul's describing in 2 Corinthians 1, where do you put Acts 21 and Philippians 1? If I'm putting a chronology together here, and I have what we're reading about here in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, where does Acts 21 and Philippians 1 occur? Before or after? After. After. And yet these are the passages we go to and say, yeah, here's Paul. This describes Paul for us. And this is our picture that we have of Paul. And I never had realized until I was going through this study that Paul's attitude that he reveals in Acts and in Philippians there, which are familiar passages to us, that attitude that he had there was hard won. He paid a dear price to have that confidence. And the dear price he paid was he went through virtually hell on earth because he was in despair, he was without hope, he had the sentence of life that was welling up in him, or death welling up in him. And who delivered him? God did. And what did that do with regard to his confidence in God? He will never waver again. He will never waver again. He can have a crowd of 50 people telling him, you need not to go there, you're going to die. And he'll say, why are you weeping and breaking my heart? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to die.
I think part of the message of these two verses in 2 Corinthians is that Paul did not anywhere describe what happened.
Yeah, I think so.
So left to our
And he may have told, he's going to come to Corinth. He's going to show up. They may ask him, well, what happened? Tell us about that. And he may have told them. But at this point in time, they don't know because he says, I don't want you to be uninformed. I want you to know what happened to me. And my problem with me is I have been uninformed about this. I have been ignorant about this. I didn't know. I didn't know where to put this. And now I can see where this happened, and then these other passages that we use to epitomize Paul's confidence and faith and trust in God and willingness to sacrifice himself for him, that's all after this, after he went through the storm. And his point is that when our need is the greatest, it's then that God is the nearest. And when all hope of human help is gone and we give it up and leave it all to God, we are still in good hands. And it's good to know that God is the one who provided that opportunity. I just now thought of a passage of Scripture. Go over to Acts 9. I'm going to put this 2 Corinthians passage in the margin here. Look in verse 16 of Acts 9. Somebody read that for me.
For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my
There you go. And there's a little inkling of it right there in 2 Corinthians 1, of how much he's going to suffer for the name of Christ.
But he was still, I mean, if you go right down there in Acts 9, further down, verse 27, Barnabas is telling everybody how fearless
Yeah,
Saul is. I mean, it wasn't like he wasn't
right.
bold and fearless. I mean, this may have been.
Well, and even your point of Lystra, when he was stoned, what did he do?
He got up and went back into the city.
Went right back into the city. Yeah,
It wasn't that he was ever timid.
right. No, and I'm not trying to take that away. What I want us to see, though, because Paul's point here, I guess I'm just wanting us to see that he wasn't Superman. He was bold. He was courageous. He recognized what God did for him and pulling him out of the wrong-headed direction he was going in. But again, the passages that we look at about how fearless and it happened after this is when it's actually expressed about him, specifically expressed. And listen, number one, we have 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. God's not going to allow you to be tempted what? Beyond what you're able to bear. And apparently Paul was able to bear this, even though he says we had no recourse. But he did have recourse, and he recognized it, and it was only in God.
Perhaps he didn't realize what great faith he had.
Yeah, well, and that's a possibility. And listen, why would you think God couldn't handle it if you believe that we serve a God who can raise the dead? Which is what his point was. There's nothing that's too difficult for him. And apparently Paul felt he needed this understanding and that God provided it for him. Okay. So again, I don't know when it happened. I don't know what the occurrence was. I was like you. I went right back. I was thinking, okay, Acts 19, Asia, Ephesus. But perhaps not. I think we have time to, I've got to get 2 questions done anyway tonight. So let's go to question 8. How was Paul delivered from all this? According to verse 10. So Mike says I got 5 minutes. Yes, he was delivered from this deadly peril by God. It was only the mighty power of God that saved their lives. And again, I don't know what the peril was. And because I don't know what the peril was, I also don't know what the delivery was. I don't know how it happened. And I don't need to know that. I just need to know it was peril and that God delivered him. And Paul's going to use, he uses almost exactly the same language after his final trial in Rome, before he's going to be killed. In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 17, he said, "But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth." So very similar language. Even in his own death, which in 2 Timothy seems to be pretty imminent, he still sees God as his rescuer, who's going to just carry him on into eternity. Because he's just going to go on and say, "Now is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, is going to give to me at that day." Or he just said it before. So ever since that deliverance there that he mentions here in 2 Corinthians, when they had the sentence of death, when all hope was gone, when he despaired of living even a moment longer, God delivered them. And Paul has changed. And again, it's the changed Paul that I see later on. That's the image. I've never had this image of Paul before. I guess I just haven't paid attention to what he's saying here and how bad it was. And so this passage shows that Paul had a breaking point. Paul had a point where he could be hopeless and helpless. And I think that as a result of this, Paul now has and will have a confidence never to be lost again, that God will deliver them. And their full hope now rests in God. And listen, it's that confidence in this essential characteristic of God, that he's all powerful and that he loves us, that he's going to care for us, he's going to do whatever is best for us. It's on that characteristic that our faith rests. And we can't forget it. Okay? I'm going to stop. I'm not going to even start question 9. I will tell you, as you look at question 9, who else had a hand in his deliverance? My question there fails to take into consideration the tense of the verb, which is future, because apparently he couldn't say the Corinthians helped him because they didn't know about it until he just told them. So it's other things that they're helping him with. But still, you can still answer the question, and we'll discuss it next week. Any other questions or comments? You can see why I didn't want to start last week, question 7. I just did not want to even broach the subject so that we could just take it as a whole. All right, thank you.